Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Building a Complete American Neighborhood, How Technology is Connecting Communities and Schools, focused on the Bay Area. Today's event is presented by CityAge and Reimagine America's Schools in association with the Siegel Family Endowment. San Jose, Oakland, and Silicon Valley leaders, along with leaders from across the country, are here today to discuss how they're building a new livability through greater collaboration between communities, schools, and leadership in tech. We want this event to be interactive, so the first thing we're going to do is ask our audience a question. To what extent do you agree with the following statement? Establishing multiple learning spaces throughout a school's neighborhood linked with an integrated technology plan will strengthen community connections. The pop-up will be on your screen. Make your selection and we will reveal the results later. Now, as the results do come in, let me introduce myself. I'm Zara Lani and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. I'm a professional broadcaster and trained meteorologist with an affinity towards sustainability. I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation about how we can create more sustainable and livable communities and schools. It's wonderful to see that although we are profiling the Bay Area, this is truly a conversation of importance to cities all across the US. Before we get started, a few quick notes about the comment section. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see the option for commenting. And when you comment in the chat section, make sure to direct your comments to everyone. This way, everyone can engage. And plus, we'd all love to read your comments throughout. You'll need to update this as your default setting directs messages just to panelists. So do choose everyone. You're going to want to change that to everyone so that we can all just engage and see your comments. For specific questions, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to ask questions to our speakers and panelists. Again, questions are to be submitted through the Q&A section and not the chat. Now, we mentioned that we want to make this event as interactive as possible. So if everyone can take a moment right now and tell us your name and where you're Zooming from. Now, as we have this moment, let's check out the results from that first poll question. It'll pop up on your screen and we will see that the results are about half of you strongly agree. And we do have another question for you. Question 2, community and philanthropic leaders, should they collaborate with school leaders to ensure every student has their needs met and the opportunity to thrive? To what extent do you agree with that statement? The options are there and we will be sharing those results as we go through today's episode. Now, while the results come in, let's start the program. Ron Bogle is going to kick it all off for us, and he brings us decades of experience from the world of architecture, education, and philanthropy as co-founder and CEO of Reimagine America's Schools. With funding from Siegel Family Endowment and catalyst funding from Schmidt Futures, Ron is leading a national initiative to bring together thought leaders from education, technology, design, and the civic community to rethink public education and reimagine our nation's public schools. Please help me to welcome Ron Bogle.
Thanks, Zara, and welcome all to this conversation. We're excited to be here and excited to be engaging with leaders across the country, but also especially in Oakland and San Jose. I'm going to be joined in a moment by Katie Knight, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Siegel Family Endowment. And between her comments and mine, we'll be sort of outlining and framing what the objectives of today's conversation are and some of the reasons that we are convening these conversations. But I would say that the main focus for both of us is to take strategies and drive them to implementable plans. And so we lean on San Jose and Oakland today to kind of see the opportunities and challenges through their eyes and how they have joined forces across numerous agencies and organizations within their communities to improve the circumstances for their citizens. So our focus really is on schools and community and how we create a new normal that will respond to some of the systematic problems that and challenges that we've had in the past. So I want to welcome Katie to the discussion today. We look forward to hearing your comments. Katie has been with the Siegel Foundation as their CEO for a few years now, and really has a strong focus on not just theoretical or academic issues, but really moving those issues to implementation. So, Katie, we're excited to be a partner with you, and especially to share in the knowledge that we'll all share in today's conversation. Katie?
Thanks, Ron. And we're, of course, really excited to partner with you all and to be a part of this conversation with CityAge, just because these issues are so important. And as you said, we really do try to focus on how we can build bridges between the academic world and the theoretical world and the 30,000-foot view that philanthropy can have into the practical associations and real life results for people in places across the country. And I think nowhere is that more true than in infrastructure. As philanthropists, just the concept of infrastructure and the things that we were thinking about when we started thinking about multidimensional infrastructure back in 2017 or so, really, we started from an approach that was about figuring out whether and how philanthropy could play a role in physical infrastructure. So we had been looking across our portfolio and thinking, both because of an interest in the systems of transportation and buildings and the future of climate, the ways in which technology was impacting all of these things, that it would be interesting just for us to do some landscaping research and understand the role that philanthropy has played historically and could play moving forward on more traditional notions of infrastructure. And through the process of doing that, we actually came to the conclusion that infrastructure for us was more than just about the physical. While roads, bridges, buildings are, of course, incredibly important, there is more to infrastructure than just these things that we see and interact with in that traditional way. And so we started to add on the notion of digital infrastructure. So that's both the physical, like fiber for internet, telecom, et cetera, and also the digital infrastructure that is the building blocks of the internet. So the open source code upon which many of our most used platforms and services rely, the data that contributes to the functioning of the internet, and then also social infrastructure. So the communication and connections that we have as individuals across all elements of society. And really all of those things considered together are what make up infrastructure. And so as we started to workshop that concept and kind of make grants against this notion that infrastructure is inherently this tripart, multifaceted thing, we started to get really positive feedback from our grantees and partners who appreciated being able to consider their work as a dimension or part of several dimensions of this view. So in 2020, at the end of 2020, we started working on a white paper and we released it and have really had such incredible conversations like this since then, as people have come from each of the corners, and I think of the infrastructure triangle of physical, digital, social, have come from each of the corners sort of into the center to start talking about the way that their work is either representative of multiple facets or overlaps with multiple facets of infrastructure, and allows us the opportunity to think about these things holistically and ideally to make better investments, because we're considering both the ways that these things are multidimensional in nature and the ways that they can serve in a multidimensional nature. So how can we move not just the needle on thinking about this for the way that we build the infrastructure, but also for the way that people experience it? And that's where I think it does come back to education, schools, and some of the conversation that Reimagine and CityAge is planning for us today, because schools are both a critical piece of infrastructure. They are physical, digital, and social in nature. And they also allow us to see opportunities to create better experiences for students and for their families and other community members through the relationship that they have with their school as a central community hub.
I didn't realize I had to turn on my camera. So, really what we're looking at then is looking at communities as single ecosystems, but they're not designed that way. They're designed in silos. And in order to move toward your vision, Katie, it really takes the ability for individual leaders to have that vision to lower the things that separate us. Children don't study in silos. And they don't live in silos. And so this idea of finding strategies for communities to see themselves through that lens is vital. And I think some of what we're going to see in today's conversation with San Jose and Oakland is that they have already, even pre-pandemic, laid down some policies, procedures, and platforms that have really benefited them during the pandemic. So, Katie, you've spent the last couple of years more in a national thought leadership role with your white paper on infrastructure and a new white paper in progress now. But in 2022, you're beginning to move a little bit into the field. We've worked with you and we'll work with you on some activities in Atlanta and in Georgia. This is our sort of premier engagement in beginning to work in California. I know you all aren't looking at a one-year plan. You have a multi-year view of the world, but where do you see going as a thought leader, moving in what direction? Moving toward more local engagement? What's your vision going forward, do you think, Katie?
I think that local is where the magic happens, especially when it relates to infrastructure. There's so much innovation and so much hard work that gets done at the city, county, and regional level that's really, really important for the future of these issues. So we've been really fortunate to have this sort of year and a half of talking about this theoretically, broadly, engaging with people across the country. And now I think we want to take what we've learned by zooming out and zoom in a bit again and really focus on engaging with people closer to the ground to see what they're doing that works and what they also see as the future for these issues, and to think about how applying a multidimensional framework, thinking about those three facets of infrastructure really holistically, can help communities thrive. And then, of course, to use that as conversation starters in other places around the country and help build a network of people who are thinking this way and trying to advance their infrastructure solutions for the future.
So while everyone is talking about infrastructure these days, you all were engaged in these conversations 4 and 5 years ago. So thanks for your leadership and for helping us kind of broaden our thinking around what infrastructure might mean and how it might help serve a new vision for how communities might not only serve their children, but all citizens, especially in neighborhoods that are underserved and schools that have been underperforming. So it's a super important topic, and so delighted to be a part of your team.
Thank you. We're delighted to be part of this conversation. And I know that the real leaders here are the people who have been working on these issues at the ground without any attention on them for years now. So always happy to talk to folks out in the world about this.
Okay. So anything else you want to add today?
No, thank you all. Looking forward to hearing the rest of this conversation.
Okay. Thank you. And to your partners, we enjoy our work. Thanks for being here, Katie. So I'd like to build on that a bit in terms of helping frame our discussion today. Let me see if I can get back there. Reimagine America Schools is focused, as the name of our organization might suggest, on schools and reimagining our schools. And we were born before the pandemic. And our central focus was on leveraging the historic amounts of money that were being spent to either build or modernize America's public school buildings. About $50 billion a year spent on renewing that educational infrastructure using Katie's framework. When the pandemic hit, we were no longer able to work in the field with school districts and mayors and education leaders. So we turned our attention to examining what issues might the pandemic raise for public education? How might the pandemic change public education as we know it, or how should it change? And so we convened over the last few years numerous groups, dozens really of groups across all professions, from design to technology, to education, to philanthropy, to civic leadership, and probed these questions. How might pandemic change public education? No real surprise that equity was a major driver, we believe, for change, but also technology. And we're not a think tank, so we had to take those ideas and say, okay, what does that mean? How does that actually play out in the real world? And so we developed two concepts that we're now testing against reality. The first is that it isn't enough to simply invest in a school building, especially schools in underserved neighborhoods, low-performing schools, schools with limited access and limited opportunity, especially in brown and Black communities. It isn't enough to simply pour funding into the bricks and mortar. And so we really adopted a support for the concept of community school, where the school itself is providing resources and experience and support for the entire community. But that even seemed to have limitations as we looked at the real world, and really ended up with the idea that if you don't also address the neighborhood that the school is in, at the same time you're addressing the school, then you are leaving a significant handicap for those students. So we developed a concept called education-centered community reinvestment, where you view the neighborhood and the school as a single ecosystem. As we said, children don't live in silos, they live in the community. And so it becomes a challenge and an opportunity, not just for the school, but for philanthropic leaders, for civic leaders, for the libraries, for the parks department. Everyone's seeing that neighborhood and that school as a part of the opportunity by working together and pulling together resources that we can finally address some of the challenges that we've been struggling with for decades. Then technology adds a new component. You know, when we invented the idea of high school, students had to all be in the same room at the same time to hear the same message. But technology liberates us from that a great deal. So now learning can take place in the school, but it can also take place throughout the neighborhood. So we're exploring not only the idea that the neighborhood and the school are a part of a single ecosystem, but that technology adds elements of opportunity that didn't exist in the last century. So today's exploration is to bring these issues to local Oakland and San Jose leaders and hear how they've approached some of these opportunities and challenges during their leadership time in these communities. It is not our idea that we would develop academic or theoretical suggestions on how folks can do it, but really now to work directly with communities to find the right solutions that would work not only in San Jose or Oakland or in Atlanta, where we were last month, but then take these ideas and help spread those ideas across the country so that other mayors, other superintendents, other philanthropists, and other education leaders might learn from the work that we're going to hear about today. We're going to start our conversation at a very exciting level. Conversation between Dr. Ted Landsmark and Mayor Libby Schaaf of Oakland. If I gave the full biography for both of them, there wouldn't be enough time for the panel. So I will give a highlights reel here, and you can Google them. But Mayor Libby Schaaf is finishing her second term as mayor of Oakland. She was limited to 2 terms, unfortunately for Oakland. You know, her language kind of frames our discussion today. Mayor, you said the urgency of the pandemic provides an opportunity to find permanent solutions to systemic problems. In this tragedy of the pandemic, there may be some silver lining that we're going to hear about today. You have viewed Oakland as a single unified community, not a series of silos, and you've dealt with homelessness, housing, public safety, streets, education, across the board. You've demonstrated the power of collaboration with schools and the private sector. If you want to know something really interesting, read about Teachers Rooted in Oakland, TRIO, the kind of innovative leadership she is providing. Not only a leader of the city of Oakland, but you grew up in Oakland, graduate of Oakland Public Schools. You did okay. I think this mayor is a 21st century mayor and a model of modern mayoral leadership. So thank you for not only the leadership you've provided in your community, but also the model you've set for others. Now, Ted Landsmark has an equally distinguished resume. A distinguished professor of public policy and urban affairs and director of the Kitty and Michael Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy at Northeastern University. Even his titles are very long. He's also a member of the Boston Planning and Development Agency's Board of Directors. Ted has been a civic planner, a civil rights leader, an equity advocate, a higher education administrator, an arts and culture researcher, a community engaged social activist in Boston and nationally. Without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Landsmark and Mayor Scheff.
Well, Mayor, it's a delight to see you again. You know, you really have demonstrated a huge amount of innovation and creativity in moving Oakland forward around issues of social justice. Many of the participants in today's presentation and in the audience are from California, but a lot of folks are from elsewhere in the country, Rochester and across the South and in Canada. So maybe you could just take a moment to describe Oakland just a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the demographics and the economics so that we have a sense of the context within which you're working.
Sure, Ted. And Ted, I promised you I'd sit in front of my fireplace for our fireside chat. So one fireplace delivered. For those of you who don't live in Oakland, I'll start by saying that the sun is shining. It's a perfect 62 degrees. Oakland is blessed with a beautiful climate, but most of all, Oakland is blessed with diversity. Our city, while going through certainly migratory changes, we certainly have seen where we used to be a plurality, a Black city, we're seeing a huge influx of Latinos. We're now a Latino plurality. We just, as of this last census, a lot of Asian immigrants. Oakland is roughly, 1 out of 4 Oaklanders were born in another country or speak another language at home. So we are incredibly diverse, but as we say in Oakland, we are hella proud of that diversity. We are in the San Francisco Bay Area. Some would say we're in Silicon Valley, but Oakland has often been left out of that conversation. We've often felt a bit like the hole in the donut. Our city is a working class city. We're one of the major port cities in the country. And of course, as technology evolves, as we're seeing a polarization of economic status that has really hurt, particularly our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities here in Oakland. I think we all will agree that the pandemic has just worsened the already unjust and unacceptable racial disparities, economic disparities that we had suffered from before the pandemic. Oakland certainly experienced those tenfold because of what we consider our beauty and our strength, but also was badly hurt by this pandemic. For new sports fans, we are home to the Oakland A's. We also share with the whole Bay Area the Golden State Warriors. Gotta love Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond. We're very, very proud. We're a city that has incredible restaurants and culture, and we have always a hotbed for social activism, for social justice. We are unapologetic as a sanctuary city. Just ask Donald Trump. We are unapologetic as the birthplace of the Black Panthers. We are always warriors for social justice. That is our DNA, our legacy, and it is definitely our future. That's Oakland.
So as a graduate of the public school system there, what role did you see when you became mayor that the schools could play in addressing some of the issues of poverty, homelessness, and economic mobility that a city with a strong industrial base, but also a lot of poverty plays? So what did you see as the goal of what the schools could be?
I've always believed a quality public education is the driving force for equity and opportunity. And I've always felt that Oakland has not lived up to its potential. And I want to acknowledge that our public school system, like all urban public school systems, exist within an inequitable, unjust, and unacceptable set of constraints and limited resources that really are just morally abhorrent. The fact that we don't invest more in education is really a national shame. But as the mayor, one fun fact is I have zero authority over schools or public education. They are entirely run by a separate elected board, completely different governmental structure. Although in Oakland, our school district and our cities share the same geographic boundaries. I've always been passionate about public education. So trust me, Ted, I have not let my lack of authority over the education system limit my activism in this area of my personal passion and belief.
So understanding that division as one of the key constraints, let's talk about the how of what you've done to work with the schools and to make the schools more central within the community. You've been noted for developing some interesting collaborations and funding mechanisms for supporting what goes on within the city of Oakland. Talk a little bit about those collaborations and about what has and hasn't worked in that regard.
I want to start by honoring personal relationships. Leaders, and I'm very blessed to have another woman, native of Oakland, came through the public schools both as a student and as an educator, is our superintendent, Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell. And to have a personal relationship with the other leaders that are in your orbit and to build that trust is so key. And both of us really felt acutely aware of what a gift that personal trust was during the pandemic. You know, in times of crisis, that can make all the difference. The other passion I've had is to try and build collective impact. Oakland has long been part of a joint powers authority that had different public systems actually meeting at a single table around the well-being of our youth. But several years ago, we decided to add the private sector to that table. We went from the Youth Ventures JPA, Joint Powers Authority, to the Oakland Thrives Leadership Council. And we invited some of our largest employers, our health providers, our biggest philanthropies, to really energize our conversations and to create a pathway for experimentation and to accelerate change. Ted, you know, I love government. I've dedicated my career to it, and I hate government. It drives me crazy. Government, let's just all be honest, while it does many great things, it also has been created to ensure stability and predictability in society. And that means it preserves the unjust status quo. It does not move quickly. It is not very nimble. And so what I have enjoyed during my time as mayor is to create public-private partnerships, to come up with a riskier, more innovative idea that is not going to get adopted by government on day one, but to sell that vision to a private funder and say, like, fund this pilot, fund this demonstration, let's learn from it. The public is far more forgiving for you to make mistakes with private dollars than with their public dollars. And if it works, if we do the right kind of rigorous evaluation, documentation, and storytelling, because narrative change is key to changing policy, we can take this demonstration and then sell it to the public sector. That's how we can then embed these good new ideas into how the major institutions like government do business, deliver services. And Ted, I hope we talk more. I know the other failure of government is all of our silos. And often these innovative demonstrations also really help cut across those silos and make us recognize that these problems are all interrelated. Our communities are holistic. Our children exist within the context of family and community and society. And if we don't take all of that into consideration, as much as it might hurt our heads, we will fail.
You know, many of us live in cities where the private sector has been invited to join with the public sector in moving forward with a civic agenda. And often what we find is that folks in the private sector always have another appointment that supersedes the appointment that they set with us. We can invite them, but they don't always come to the table. Tell us a bit about the narratives that you have employed to get the private sector involved, particularly in developing the kinds of pilots you've done in Oakland.
Well, Ted, honestly, that's the nice thing about being the mayor. People return your phone calls. They show up for your meetings. So to those of you who are in nonprofits or social ventures, you know, a lot of people don't like working with politicians for very good reasons. But when you can engage somebody with positional authority who's willing to use that positional authority to gain access, to get an audience, to have the conversation, it can produce good things. It just can. And I also think, Ted, that we often fail because we are not ambitious enough. You can get people sometimes excited about a bigger, more transformative vision than just like, let's fund this one little project. And I'll give you an example. You know, when I became the mayor, I do care deeply about public education. And everyone, you know, runs to you when you first get elected with their great idea. And somebody wanted me to start a K to college program where kindergartners get, you know, a college savings account. Somebody else wanted me to start one for babies born into poverty, savings account and financial coaching. Somebody else wanted me to really help support an existing college scholarship program and add these things called future centers to our high schools and middle schools to connect kids to kind of linked learning and internships and jobs. And I was just like, holy moly, this is overwhelming. Like, you know, 6 different educational ideas. I couldn't possibly succeed at all of them. I better just pick one. And then it came to me, Ted, that when you do them all and you show people how you are creating a continuum of care from the moment a baby is born to the moment that they actually get that degree in their hand, ready to launch into a life-sustaining career, like you're going to be more successful at each point in that journey because you have thought about them all and you've aligned them as a continuum. And you are not just going to serve the kids that are lucky enough to get into your program. You're going to say, we here in Oakland, California, are going to change the culture. We are going to change the expectation that when you're born in Oakland, California, you know that there is a whole city around you that's going to make sure you don't just get to college, you get through college. And that's what we've done with the Oakland Promise. And that bigness, that ambition actually attracted donors who might not be interested in giving to like a little scholarship program. And I am excited to announce that we even, remember I told you, you demonstrate it, you get people excited, then you sell it to the public sector. We placed on our ballot a question to our voters: would you pay more in taxes if that money guaranteed access to quality preschool for every 3- and 4-year-old in this city, and access and financial support for every student in this city to attend college? And our voters said yes. So we just celebrated the passage of Measure AA. It will create $30 million a year for the next 30 years to support those two pieces of our continuum of excellence for our children. That is exciting, and it would never have happened without the upfront private investment to demonstrate what we could do.
You have brought together a number of sectors. How long did it take to get various of the groups to decide that it was okay to work with each other, leading up to this very successful long-term vote? What was the evidence you needed to present particularly to the private sector folks, that this was going to work and that it would have positive long-term public effects?
Well, I do think it is important to bring in rigorous evaluation, as well as what we talked about before, that narrative change, those stories that just, grip your heart. And I will say, for any of you who have mayors in your cities that, like me, have no jurisdiction over education, my whole journey started with pitching to just a few philanthropists an ask for $160,000. That was my original ask, just so I could hire for 1 year an education director. That education director then went out to the funding community, built a team, built the Oakland Promise, has since built other pilots like TRIO Ron talked about, which is really addressing teacher retention and diversity and representation through a housing benefit and a guaranteed income benefit. We've done, and then I really hope we talk about Oakland Undivided, which is our student-centered attempt to close the digital divide for good in Oakland. So all of these projects that $160,000 gift has actually created over my 7 years as mayor, we actually totaled it up, and those different initiatives have garnered $125 million in private sector investment.
So we'd love to hear you elaborate on TRIO and on your use of technology in terms of bringing educational resources together. So why don't you start talking a little bit about the use of technology, and then let's go back to TRIO.
Ron talked about, mentioned the importance of technology and some of the lessons that we've learned through this pandemic, that education is no longer physically in schools. When our kids, had to go home and learn, it really was kind of a shock to our systems. And I will say, I'm a mom. I have 2 kids in school myself. And at the beginning of the pandemic, which was just so frightening, I had this moment of realization that I was putting out life-saving information, where you could get COVID tested, where you could get food for your family, where you could get unemployment benefits, life-saving information, whether to wear a mask, whether to not wear a mask, what kind of mask to wear. Like, all of this at this beginning of the pandemic, information was the most
valuable commodity we had. And yet everything I was doing was digital. It was posted on social media, it was Zoom town halls, it was email blasts, it was referring people to websites where they could apply for these resources or benefits. And I just literally like broke into tears and just thought, what is it like for that mom in Oakland who doesn't speak English, who is living in an overcrowded apartment in deep East Oakland with her children at home and no access to technology, which means no access to information right now. So, you know, we went on lockdown. We were the first in the country to go on lockdown in 2020. And it just raised in me, like, you know, a mama grizzly bear emotion of we are fucking fictionless. Part of my language. In 1996, I led Oakland's Net Day. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Al Gore's scrolling table down high school hallways. Like, physical inclusion has always been a passion for mine, but the pandemic literally made it a survival tool. And we very quickly, again, using, you know,
The privilege of being the mayor, you know, I could send an email to Jack Dorsey, and by that night I had $10 million. I hope everyone gets to experience that. It is a great feeling. And we knew that we didn't just need to get computers into these students' homes. They needed a reliable, high-speed internet connection, and they needed culturally competent tech support in their language so they could navigate this new device and new tool of an internet connection. We, during that pandemic year, took our low-income students who at the beginning of the pandemic, only 12% of them had any technology access, to by the end of that year, 98%. And that crossed every demographic and income level. And we are never going to go back. Ted, I'm very proud of Oakland Undivided. We have created a movement, a community coalition that is standing up for digital inclusion as a civil right.
So elaborate further on TRIO and how you connected the wider community to what it is you've done to bring technology, particularly to families that didn't have that access before.
Well, TRIO is not about technology. TRIO came out of our seeing how our school teachers were leaving in droves, and that we were not seeing teachers whose studies show BIPOC teachers see much better outcomes with their students, and they see you know, the similar lived experiences, particularly with low-income students of color, way higher outcomes, although all students actually see higher outcomes. And as we listened to our teachers about why they were leaving the profession within 1 to 2 to 3 years, or why certain teachers were choosing not to even, or talented people were choosing to not enter teaching. In a place like the Bay Area, the cost of housing relative to a teacher's income is the biggest factor in both attraction and retention, particularly of BIPOC teachers. And so we sought to change that. And as I know there's some designers on this call, in our first year, we gave teachers a choice to either get a huge subsidy to pay for their own housing, or we found a building, a beautiful development that was willing to rent to the teachers below market, and we paid the difference between 30% of their income and the rent, and a reduced rent for this beautiful, beautiful development. And all but one of the teachers chose to live in the development because it's not just about the cost. It was this opportunity to have a community of other educators. And these were all doing their last year of student teaching while earning a graduate degree. It's called our residency program. And so it was an interesting learning for us to see that it's not just the money, it is where you live and how you live.
Much of what you've described is premised upon very effective use of data and the management of policy based upon data. What were your sources? Did you have people within city government who were generating the kind of data and analytical information that you needed in order to continue to build on the narrative of the success of the kinds of investments that you were making?
I didn't have anybody in city government, but this gets back to partnerships and relationships of trust. We had the relationships within the school district to have immediate access to their data. We had the relationships to be able to do a survey of teachers to actually hear from them directly and to put together focus groups and to stand up advisory groups. Every one of our initiatives has several advisory groups so that everyone has a seat at that table. That is very important. I will tell you, my team, they don't just do programs or projects, they build movements. That is the attitude with which they do everything. This has to be something where everyone feels that they have a voice in both the process and the outcome.
So as we wind down, I've got three somewhat interconnected questions. One, how did you make sure that there was really wide and deep community engagement with what you're doing? Two, are there things as mayor that you wished you had been able to get to? And three, what are your key takeaways around improving the schools and really centering them within the communities?
I'll start with your last question first. The Oakland Public School District and its leadership truly believes in having full service community schools. And I say again, we have to see our students within the context of family, community, society. And if any one of those layers is not supporting that student, we're not succeeding. And when we think about, and let's just be clear, I almost hesitate to use the term silver linings because this cloud has been so dark. I mean, the level of loss, death, illness, disparities, suffering, trauma that has come out of this pandemic just cannot be understated. But recognizing that, one, there's an appetite for radical change because our lives have been upended. Two, the physical walls and spaces don't matter as much anymore. We need to see home as a classroom. We need to see community as a space for learning. And technology has a promise. It has perils as well, but it has a promise of allowing us to be present. For example, the school district saw more parents attending their student-teacher conferences because they could do it for the first time by phone or by Zoom or by FaceTime. So instead of having to take a day off work, they were able to sneak off to the break room. And so how do we take advantage of the fact that our walls have come down? We're extremely concerned about the impact of the trauma of this pandemic and all the loss that it has caused on our young people. We have traditionally stood up school-based health clinics, but teens, they love being on their phones. And another thing we learned during the pandemic, some teens actually attended their therapy sessions more frequently when they could do it by Zoom or by phone or by FaceTime than when they had to physically come in for appointments. How can we bring wellness to our students where they are, whether that's their home, their favorite boba shop, or, you know, I told you I have teenagers, or our libraries, our rec centers. You know, how do we reimagine these community spaces? We all got used to doing things outdoors. We're looking at, you know, popping up things. We did it with vaccinations and testing sites. I remember getting my blood drawn in a subway parking lot, or BART parking lot during COVID. I just thought, this is so interesting. I'm like going to the doctor in a parking lot. But that's what we learned to do. So let us not unlearn those things, but really unleash our imaginations so that we can bring all the supports that our children need to them where they are.
So in our closing couple of seconds, what's the caption under the photo that you would want people to remember about your work with schools and technology in Oakland?
It would be about Oakland. I would love the headline for Oakland to be "Oakland ends all racial disparities."
Thank you.
In all indicators of wellness for its children.
When I mentioned to my colleagues here in Boston that we would have a conversation today, they were thrilled and all said that they wish they were having this conversation. I want to thank you for your innovation and your leadership, and for sharing your thoughts and ideas and policies with us this afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. As we continue with today's show, here are the results from our last poll question. It'll pop up on your screen, and you can see that more than half of you chose the answer strongly agree. Now, watch carefully during this next conversation, because another question will pop up on your screen while our panelists discussed. And it is time for our next panel, Schools at the Center of Community. Let me introduce our panelists. First, we have Deborah L. McCoy. Deb is the Executive Director and founder of the UC Berkeley Center for Cities and Schools at the Institute of Urban and Regional Development, and a lecturer in the Department of City and Regional Planning and the Graduate School of Education. Central to her work is the critical role young people play in urban and metropolitan change and transformation. Next is Rosalind Huey. Rosalind is a Deputy City Manager for the City of San Jose. She provides leadership and coordination for city offices shaping the future of the city, including planning, housing, transportation, economic development, and cultural affairs. Building on her expertise in urban planning, Rosalind's career has centered in city building, civic engagement, and leading with people. Next up is Leo Gonzalez, Principal and Director of Education at the global architectural firm HKS. He's a creative leader and storyteller and leads the conceptualization, development, and implementation of school, campus, and library designs. He believes in designing spaces that inspire learning and support community. And our final panelist is Jill Bourne, City Librarian at the San Jose Public Library. She serves a diverse community of more than 1 million residents. She focuses on knowledge, access, public technology, and community learning. She also manages a team that is committed to enhancing the relevance and leveraging the value of public libraries in the communities they serve. And we're welcoming Ron Vogelback as our panel moderator. Ron, you can take it from here. Ron, have you got your mic on?
I do. It looks like I have a manual transmission here rather than an automatic gear shift. I have the mic on and my video. Let me ask, can I be heard? Oh, good. Thank you.
We can hear you clear. Take it away.
All right. Thanks so much for the introduction, and sorry for the technical slip up. The mayor put a lot of stuff out on the table. You all are in San Jose, she's in Oakland, so you have a different set of circumstances. But I'm excited to kind of jump into this conversation. I have shared with the panel that I hope it will be a conversation rather than a straight up Q&A visit. So we have 4 people here that are not shy, I can tell already. Where should we start? I think I'd just like to start by opening up Mayor Schaaf's comments and see if there's anything that really resonates with you, or that you think you have dealt with differently in San Jose. Any kind of initial sort of reflections on what we just listened to?
I can jump in because as the mayor was talking, I was thinking about the work that we've done in San Jose and our relationship with schools. Now in San Jose, we have 19 school districts, which means 19 school boards, superintendents, and leadership. And then we have at least 13 other local education agencies. So we like to say we're rich with partners, but it actually created kind of a daunting prospect for many years for the city. So, similar to what Mayor Schaap was describing, the city doesn't have authority over the schools in many ways. And at times the city's approach was somewhat hands-off in the education space, which kind of suggesting that education is the realm of schools and the city doesn't, do education. But in San Jose, in 2016, we made kind of a strong statement by adopting what we called the Education and Digital Literacy Strategy, which was adopted by our city council. And it really laid out a plan for recognizing a few really important concepts. One is that education is incredibly important to our residents for their own personal success, but also our community, that our students are the future of our city, and that the city has an essential role to play in supporting our student success. And when you say it like that, it makes so much sense. But, again, it was kind of challenging. So I think San Jose took that step. We also built on a structure that we've had for a long time, which is a formalized agreement called the School City Collaborative, which is a partnership between the city and all school district leadership. It's led by our mayor and the superintendent of the County Office of Education, and supported by city staff. So, it has been challenging to build a joint work plan of things that are really important to both of us. But we kept working on it. We kept trying to make it relevant to us. And so, long story short, when the pandemic hit our city hard in early 2020, our students were drastically impacted by that move to distance learning. And, when you think back, it was this really isolating, anxiety-ridden time. But the silver lining for me was that our partnerships we had developed allowed us to really pivot quickly and implement formal agreements with 32 local education agencies that serve San Jose students and provide, I think it was 16,000 quality hotspots to student households in a program that we established at that time called SJ Access, which now has expanded into devices and public Wi-Fi networks and digital literacy programming and so on and so on. So really that hard work of creating the relationships, pays off in so many other ways.
So the education was a school city collaboration.
School city collaborative, yeah.
Collaborative. Did you see the pandemic in any way kind of reshape the way that collaboration functions or its purpose, or were your concepts going into the pandemic, did they really serve the community well through the pandemic? Coming out of the pandemic, is it a different organization, or is it still holding its same kind of vision, mission, and function?
I think that what it helped us realize was the importance of those connections that we had been. We're always evolving the relationship and the work plan. And so to your question, certainly we honed in on a few high priorities during the pandemic. We're not worried as much about some of the other activities that we were looking at prior to the pandemic. It became mostly about student support, student connectivity, and now we're looking at next year and developing out new priorities. So it made us focus, like I think the pandemic did for a lot of things. But what was, again, like sort of rewarding is that all that work had made it so much easier in the end when we all sat together in Zoom for our first, collaborative meeting of the pandemic and said, wow, like, look at what we accomplished. And, prior to the pandemic, there's a lot more focus on how we're different than how we can work together. And so I think that, for me, it's been such a great journey that way. And so now, like, we are going to refocus on as we reopen and hopefully, continue that strong bond where we both have to focus on the student at all times and not how our systems are different.
So the collaborative was established in the 90s, I think. So it really, if you look at it through the lens of Siegel, it's a part of your community infrastructure. It's a piece of infrastructure that is there, stable, and that serves the community.
It is, but we revamped it significantly within the past 4 years prior to the pandemic, because it had become kind of a place where there were sort of sharing of information, reporting out, somewhat randomly. And we really shifted it into the idea of a shared work plan. And that was the challenge, is what are the topics that are, relevant to both of us, that we both school organizations and the city have an equal investment in or prioritize in the same way to get to an outcome. And that's where all the, the bureaucratic or the sort of organizational divides between how we operate can kind of get in the way. But with the commitment of leadership, I think that, we've been able to move it forward.
You want to read more about the collaborative, there's a link in the chat for you that will give you all the details you want. Any other thoughts coming off of the mayor's comments?
Well, Ron, I'll chime in, and I'm not, I don't practice in San Jose or in Oakland, or for that matter in K-12. I do in Texas. But I mean, I think the challenges are very similar in terms of the infrastructure or the institutions that govern, the cities and education and how siloed they are. Independent school districts, by virtue of them being elected independently and being essentially taxing authorities, carry a big stick and a lot of power, and as such are driven like bureaucracies with the same challenges that large cities often face, right? And that is that the accountability and the measures of success of the people who lead them are not connected directly to the success of the people they serve. And so change, eliciting change in those institutions is incredibly difficult because there's no incentive. Their failure means they'll be voted out. And so, I think that as professionals who work in those environments, what we strive to do is to try to engage them well before they've planned their bonds, right? The way they fund their projects is interesting because they usually do it through an analysis of demographic growth projections and facility and deficiencies. They match the two, they identify the needs, and then they fund new projects. And I think they're missing the opportunity, and the pandemic has really highlighted this, the opportunity to think about the role that they can play as an institution that has so much power in delivering transformative experiences for their communities, right? So we've challenged districts to think about how can they put forth a bond plan for election that considers their role in accessing the investment dollars that are going to come, say, to the North Texas region through the growth that is projected in the entire region in the next 20 years, right? So say we have projected that the North Texas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is going to grow to 10 million people by 2050. That's about 3.5 more million people than we are today. And all of that growth is going to drive a lot of investment, a lot of money. And that money is all going to northern suburbs of the area that have the infrastructure and that have developed in a way that attracts the investment. And so a challenge to the school district in an urban setting is, what are you doing to capture that money? How are you planning your bond in a way that is in support of delivering equitable access to that opportunity for the residents that are here today so that they don't become forgotten? And I think that when you table it in that sense, it opens up their eyes to the opportunity, and it begins to make them accountable, and it begins to help them see that they are part of a larger ecosystem that includes the city and all these other partnerships. And so when I heard the mayor talk earlier, it really drove that point home, because that is in essence what she's done from the other side, right? From the city side, is begin to try and engage all of these pieces that build that full community.
Rosalind, any front of mind thoughts that you'd like to share, opening up comments?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ron. One of the things that resonated with me listening to the mayor, and gee, what a tremendous champion she is for her city. It really struck me about how Oakland really does celebrate its diversity. And we here in San Jose, right, very much so a very diverse community, a city of over 1 million people. And similar to Oakland, 40% of our population is foreign born. And so it leaves me to think how we can build upon that diversity in terms of investing in our communities and in our neighborhoods. And I bring the lens of an urban planner and land use development. So I'm thinking about how we as cities can rethink how we build and design and grow our cities. And we've thought a lot about that in San Jose, and a lot of that thinking is included in our city's general plan. And really that is our long range document, our 20-year blueprint for how we want to grow and develop in the future. And the very core theme of that is here in San Jose, we have to see a more urban future. And that means that our neighborhoods, right, really have to be places that have a mix of uses and a mix of services. And really there are places for people of all income levels, right? And all ages and stages of life. And the reason that is so important, and bringing this back to schools really being the hub of our neighborhoods, it's that it's so interrelated. So in terms of strengthening our schools, I really see it as strengthening our communities and strengthening our families. And really just so important about this, this whole path in terms of education from cradle to career paths, right, in our communities, and how we really have to begin to invest. And Jill has shared, really a lot of the investments that we have done here in San Jose, working collaboratively with the school districts, and just a host of other things. I think it really is going to take targeted, intentional investment. So here in San Jose, we have a number of things underway, for example, like San Jose Promise, where we are making sure that we have college readiness programs and scholarships and pathways for our students. San Jose Learns, which provides after-school opportunities for our students. San Jose Works, right, that offers students from our low-income and underserved neighborhoods really their first jobs to set them on a path for success and opportunity. San Jose Aspires, really that aims to reinvent the college preparation process for our students. So just a number of programs that we have to continue to create as ways to really invest in our students and invest in our neighborhoods.
Give Deb an opportunity to respond to the mayor's comments. I know you work with Mayor's staff, Deb, and then I'd love to come back, Rosalind, and pick up where we left off with your comments.
Sure, thanks, Ron. Hi. It's just humbling to be here with such great visionaries. Mayor Schaaf has long been a champion, not only for schools, but for young people and students. She's the first to show up when anyone is inviting her to a school, Skyline, her alma mater, or anywhere else in Oakland. And also the leadership in San Jose. It's just inspiring to see folks in power really honor the role of young people. And I think that's what I'll inject into this conversation is one of the great connectors between our cities and schools is actually our young people, where we're not only coming together for young people, but when we strategically partner with young people so that we're planning with young people and engaging in policymaking with young people. The Y Plan is a civic engagement strategy that is engaged both in Oakland and now in San Jose and throughout many cities in Silicon Valley for a number of years, over 20 years, I can't believe it. Actually started at McClymonds High School in Oakland over 20 years ago. And it's a strategy to engage young people critically in thinking about place and placemaking, and then take those insights from adults not in one way or the other, but as real text for learning for everybody, for city leaders, for community partners, for parents, and teachers, most importantly, to say what we say, turn the school inside out so that the city becomes a text for learning and young people become agents of change for social transformation in the places that we live. I can serve lots of examples, but let me pause there and see if you want me to go in one way or anywhere. But
let me follow up, if I can, on this whole business of community engagement. It seems like the pandemic is redefining what community engagement really looks like. There seems to be a passion for more authentic engagement with citizens and students, young people. What's the saying? If you don't do it with me, you're not doing it for me. You know, whose voice gets to express the vision for the community? Where does that happen? I can appreciate that San Jose has to be highly involved with citizen engagement, but has the pandemic kind of reshaped what we think about community engagement in your region? And you know, Leo, since you work nationally, you know, are you beginning to see any changes in how communities engage around the creation of school? I think that's an important topic. I would love to hear your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, so I'll jump right in terms of San Jose. You know, I think in terms of what the pandemic has taught us more than anything else is how we so desperately need to be connected, right? To our community, to our residents, to our students, to our business owners. That is just being connected and making sure people have access and are connected to the resources and services they need. I also say I'll say taught me personally is, you know, our communities and our residents and the folks in our communities, they are the experts, right? They are the subject matter experts. And we really need to value that and understand that our residents' lived experience really is what shapes or should shape the decision-making that's going on in city government in terms of new policies, new initiatives, new projects and programming. That they are the experts and know what the problems are and obviously can help us co-create what those solutions should be. I will say this, that just in general, during the pandemic, right, using Zoom and other platforms, right, it's just opened up the opportunity for so many more people to be involved and be connected, and that's been awesome. But on the other hand, we know that there are many in our communities who aren't digitally connected, and so we just simply cannot rely on these virtual platforms to making sure that we're staying connected to them. So I think we're learning that we're always going to have to be creating new strategies, using new tools, and really also taking advantage of our community-based organizations and our partnerships with them and their work, their deep, deep work and connections with our communities, particularly those that have been historically been underserved.
And Ron, to answer your question about engagement and to build a little bit on what Rosalind was saying, I think it's a mixed bag, right? Some communities, some districts have really recognized the importance of transparent and meaningful engagement and real engagement. Others continue to look for engagement that just says that they're engaging, but aren't really deeply engaging. You know, I struggle a little bit with a lot of our potential clients continuing to operate or reverting back to the way it was, right? And not taking the opportunity that the pandemic has afforded us to rethink why and how we do what we do. You know, as Rosalind was saying, not everybody has access to the same conditions, and that goes, you know, for all of it, right? For engagement, the digital connection for engagement, even when those programs that have delivered hotspots have been successful, and we've seen numerous cases where they have been across the country. You know, learning in the kitchen while mom is cooking and doing the dishes is not learning, right? The outcomes, we're still years away from really understanding if the attainment is there. And it's likely not. And then the burnout and the stress that it represents to our teachers, having to, you know, deliver content in a hybrid environment or in a digital environment, only replicating what is supposed to have to be done in person, is very challenging in terms of its effectiveness. So I think that there are cases where there's a recognition that real engagement is important and is paramount to success. And when that happens, you know, even engaging deeper than just those community leaders, you know, underserved communities usually have community leadership that also have a power structure that prevents voices from being heard. And going deeper than that, it just takes so much dedication and persistence. And I think we need to take it on as our civic duty, you know, us as parents, those of us who are parents, as residents who are taxed by school districts, we need to take our civic responsibility to heart and attend and participate in the public discourse, in the board meetings, not so that we can discuss whether we should have mask mandates or not, but to discuss whether we're going to be engaged, whether we're going to be asked, consulted, whether the district is delivering the real education that we are paying for through our taxes. And that doesn't happen because that takes a lot of work that is to be taken personally, not paid for, right? So I don't know if that answered your question.
So the organizers want us to pop up a question for the audience. So let me tee it up. We've talked about, Leo talked about reverting back to the way it was and the way we do things. Mayor talked about an appetite for radical change. So set the stage. Many communities are locked in their bureaucracies. And those bureaucracies are powerful because the funding streams are different, the authorities are different, the responsibilities are not necessarily shared. So how do parks and transportation departments and mayor's offices and school districts break down those barriers and create new ways of working together? It sounds like a city like San Jose has all of the right pieces in place, but not every city does. So I guess the question that I would like to ask the panel and then the audience is, how optimistic are you that we're actually going to be able to respond to this demand for radical change as opposed to reverting back to the ways that we've always done it?
Ron, can I share what I feel is this really inspiring
Yes, Deb.
instance of potentially radical change? And I just want to give a shout out to the San Jose Transportation Department, because they got out of their comfort zone this year with trying to figure out Vision Zero and really addressing pedestrian fatalities and injuries. And under Jessica Zank, who's an alumni of our program, is working with local schools, and in particular a bilingual middle school, Escuela Popular, in partnership with San Jose State. And I think higher ed is also an important member of this ecosystem when we talk about schools. And they have the community using online, a hybrid this year, using online so that her team could go and talk to the teachers and work with students, have been engaging the students and the teachers in understanding that neighborhood and the insights around, just safety precautions and how they use the streets to protect the whole city and use those insights across the whole city. So it's just been an amazing example of really outside their comfort zone. And they'll say they're not used to, going in and directly working in a classroom. And I think being uncomfortable is part of the real key to changing these standard practices that can lead to the transformation that the mayor not only talks about, but she really does it.
Jill, what are your thoughts?
Did you say me?
Yeah, so sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, and I actually was thinking of my colleague Rosalind because, our city is trying to restructure how we work in terms of helping our communities recover from the pandemic, and really to your point earlier, how we change how we did things before and don't just revert to the old, possibly siloed ways of serving our community. Possibly one directional ways of understanding their needs. And so a lot of work's been done to sort of force entities to work across departmentally with our schools, but also even within the city, and Rosalind oversees a group that's really focusing on recovery. And what's interesting to me is that it is talking about how libraries and parks and transportation and every entity in the city is focused around responding to what we're hearing from our communities that their needs are for recovery, not the other way around, not sort of organizing our workflow to accomplish our goals. It's more about hearing what the needs are and then figuring out how to engage in that dialogue, but really breaking down the barriers across the different functions of our city. So I just took away everything you wanted to say, Rosalind.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think, during the pandemic and probably going on for quite some time, right? We're going to be focusing on what the needs are. And I think we just understand as city government where the needs are, we're going to step in and we're going to fill the gap. So I'll give you a quick example. When the pandemic first started, huge need for getting food to our residents that needed it. Critical need. Generally a function of the county, but the county knew they didn't have the resources. They were not going to be able to handle it. They turned to the city of San Jose and say, hey, can you help? And of course, yes, we're going to feed our residents. So that's something we had never been involved in before. And we pulled staff. Jill, I don't know, we had some of your staff, but certainly from our Department of Parks and Recreation staff just thrown into the throes of that. So that's just one example. In terms of working with our residents, the city does have a COVID-19 recovery task force, and this group is made up of 55 different community-based organizations, a huge group, but really from every sector in our community. And these are organizations that already have those deep connections to our residents. And our approach, this task force approach, is we are going to go to our communities and our neighborhoods, and we're going to listen. We're not going to come up with the ideas in our meetings and then go to our communities and say, hey, this is what we came up with. We think this is going to work beautifully for you. No, we're going to go and we're going to do a series of listening sessions, and we're going to listen and we're going to learn, and we might have to relearn some things. And so I think this approach to community engagement, like this is something that we're going to continue. Obviously aren't going to go back to those older community engagement strategies and tools. That this is the way that we're going to have to continue to do it. We're going to have to listen and we're going to have to learn, and then together, right, co-create with our residents and stakeholders what those solutions should be.
So believe it or not, we really only have about 5 minutes. I can't believe the time has just zipped by so quickly, and I still have 47 questions, and I wasn't even going to ask questions. And I know Jill has to hop off. She has a hard finish. So what I'd like to do, Jill, is offer you just a chance to give a minute or two of some things that you were burning to say but haven't. And then Deb, you get to have that same opportunity. And then I'm going to ask Rosalind and Leo about some very specific design questions and the relationship of design and equity. So I'd kind of like to end on that note because that's a big part of our focus. But Jill, first, we'll let you have any points that you'd like to make before signing off.
Sure. Yeah, no. And when Rosalind was talking about the food insecurity of our communities, that was a role that the schools have always played, providing lunches for students who were suddenly at home. And so they weren't getting the free and reduced lunches that they'd always gotten. And similarly, the city has really pivoted around providing talking to our schools and our families about what's needed in terms of out of school time learning situations for students, when a lot of after school programs were shut, have still not resumed service. Or if the parent needs to be out of the home and the student needs to be home, are there learning pods that we can provide? So we're really continuing to adapt and work with our schools and the families to hear what their needs are and trying to provide it. And the only last thing I forgot to say earlier is one of the biggest actions San Jose took eventually was to, as part of our education strategy, was to adopt the city's first education policy. And so that really put a stake in the ground to say that the city does have a role in education. And it really aligns our education work with other guiding city policies like the general plan. It really does contemplate every way in which the city interacts with not only our schools, but our students and their families, and how the city needs to be thinking about education as we make those other decisions, which traditionally have been thought of kind of in a vacuum away from education. So education policy.
Okay, go meet with your
Thank
city councilman. Thank you, Jill. And Deb, throw something at us.
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway for me is engaging young people in the city planning processes, the general plan or transportation, is that we call a double bottom line, and to think about the outcome first. About it's not just about improving our cities. The amazing thing is when you engage young people in these processes, as you've said, learning all the time, right, in and outside of the classroom, it also really, really builds college, career, and civic readiness. And so the collaboration is a win-win, both for communities, for cities, for private sector that's increasingly getting involved, and young people. And so in our preparation, we talked about the importance of workforce readiness, Rosalind, and that's such a critical thing for cities. Engaging young people in this work, authentic work that's related to their lives, is an amazing way, and we have this in research, that really leads to their academic development. And that it's just, it's good for everybody. So the outcomes, when I think about them first, really leads to transformative futures. So thank you.
Where can we find more information on Y Plan?
Well, we just wrote a book on Y Plan called Planning Cities Forum with Young People Over 20 Years. And we are doing everything we can right now to put all of our work as public access. So you can just Google Y Plan at Berkeley. And there's a huge amount of public resources, stories. There's a database of over 200 youth engagement projects. And we are committing to putting all our curriculum and lessons and some new videos online this spring to make it fully free and publicly accessible.
Great. So with permission of the panel, I'd like to run about 5 minutes over. We may lose a few in the audience, but I'm compelled to ask Rosalind and Leo a couple of questions about design. So Leo, I'm going to go ahead and give you forewarning. The question from you is, you've said that designing schools is an opportunity to challenge the status quo and address inequities in education. And you've said, or you believe, that the pandemic may change the way we physically design schools. I'd like to kind of explore that with you for a minute, but Rosalind, first you. You're an urban planner. You've worked in a number of major cities that have had interesting and challenging opportunities around urban planning. You've also had a core focus of your work around equity, diversity, and inclusion. How does the design, the physical design of a neighborhood, support or betray those objectives, in your view? And what kind of mistakes have we made in the way we design our neighborhoods? Now, you could take 3 hours on that answer, I know for a fact, but but if you could just share some initial thoughts, because I think this is one of the new norms. We can't simply design neighborhoods the way we always have and find the solutions that we must find. So give us some advice, Rosalind.
So I think that we've been thinking about this in the wrong way. Like in my mind, it's quite simplistic. I have been engaging neighborhoods in urban planning and land use development issues for over 30 years. And there is not one neighborhood that doesn't want housing choices, quality schools, good jobs nearby, quality retail, services that I can walk to, a cafe down the block, great open spaces, a place for my kids to play, a place to walk my dog. There is not one neighborhood that doesn't want that. And so, you know, if we then think about designing our places for people and for all of that activity, right? You know, one of the things that I think has not served us well is our zoning patterns and our history of Euclidean zoning, right? Which separates us, it separates uses. Now, some of that is important, right? You don't want residential development near industrial development, for example, but over time, what's happened is that we have not allowed different uses that should be mixed up together to co-create and be together. And so we have decades of that development pattern that we're now trying to fix, because now everybody understands mixed use development. Yeah, that's what's needed. And so I think that we're learning and understanding now, right, how we need to think about place and the people in the places. And then now just fixing those design strategy and approaches. And I'll just give you a quick example. I mean, just this morning, I'm dropping my son off at school and I'm going down the street and I'm looking at, you know, brand new townhomes, and they've got clearly the garages are in the rear. And so down the street, it's got all the great elements. I see a nice sidewalk, we've got street trees, but I'm looking at the space, it's completely dead, because no one is ever going to use their front door. Everybody's going to come in the rear, in their garage, go in their home, and never interact with the street. And so we've got to get back to understanding how we design our spaces and our buildings to create that street activity where people really do want to gather and interact. So that's just one example.
So I want to call you back and take about 30 more minutes on this subject, but not today. And this is really getting at a part of the physical infrastructure that Katie was talking about, is how we design our neighborhoods can help support community and help support what we're calling a complete neighborhood.
Exactly.
Leo, how does design confront status quo, the design of the school? That's kind of a two-part question. The second part is, and how might the design of schools beyond, you know, better circulation and so forth, how might design of schools change as a result of the experience we've had with the pandemic? And I would just put a footnote on it. This is not a theoretical question. We will be spending $50 billion of public money a year building schools. And sadly, 90% of those will be built on a 1950 model where students are passive, sitting in a classroom, listening to a teacher. That's not the way we need to be building our learning environments. And I know, Leo, the quality of your work. Leo is one of the top school designers in the country. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts about where are we going with school design and how can we use the design to help challenge the status quo?
So, I mean, this is, I think what
You have 30 seconds.
This is what's become my purpose now, right? I think through the experiences that I've had, I've been more and more inclined to seek out opportunities to challenge the status quo for the reasons that you mentioned. And, you know, just building on or picking up on the end of what Rosalind said, I think the thing that we must all understand is that design gives us a tool and an opportunity to shape behavior, right? And so when she was talking about the reasoning behind putting the garages in the back is not considering the full impact of that decision, right? And so when we look at design, we need to look at it holistically, and we need to think about and predict what design moves create. And then we also need to know that through design, we can impact all of the things that we are trying to correct, that we see as ailments in our students and in our schools, right? And so, for example, we talk a lot about equity, we talk a lot about emotional health and well-being, right? I mean, stress, anxiety, and depression are an epidemic in our students in K-12 and in higher ed. And yet, school boards, colleges, universities, they do not put enough investment into first understanding what design strategies are easily accessed to impact a reduction in stress, anxiety, and depression. And then, and they don't plan for it and they don't talk about it because it's harder. It's harder than doing what they're used to doing, right? And so what I think is available to us now is the ability to engage the users of these facilities to create user-centric design solutions that address the real issues, right? Like you said, we're going to make huge investments. School districts are going to make incredible capital investments. And it's our role as designers to push them to identify the hidden value in those investments. So they're going to give us a program of needs that they think they've identified and they have as institutions that represent a number of classrooms and facilities that support that pedagogy that they're trying to deliver. And our role is to say, okay, we're going to deliver all that, but in doing so, what are the real problems that your community faces, and how can you use these $50 million, $25 million, $100 million to solve for those? And then engage the community and understand what they think. In Lake Highlands High School here in Dallas, we were hired to do a 24 classroom edition that connected 2 separate buildings in a high school. When we engaged the community, they thought we were doing an engagement like Rosalind suggested, right? We are going to come in and we already have a solution in mind. We're going to ask you, we're going to pretend we listen, and we're going to unveil a solution because that's what the district and the community is used to. And we really came in actively listening without a preconceived idea. And what we heard was that this one high school in 2 buildings had 3 cafeterias and only one served free and reduced lunch. You can imagine what that looked like. So the school was self-segregating, not by choice, but by the circumstances that they had in front of them. We pushed the school district to abandon the idea of connecting these 2 buildings with a corridor and classrooms. And we said, you cannot make this problem worse. Let's abandon your cafeterias and build a connecting hub that has a new cafeteria that is designed with strategies to improve emotional health and well-being and reduce anxiety and depression through access, physical and visual access to nature, with the right acoustics, with choice in where and how you have your lunch period. In other words, don't create a mess hall with the same chairs and tables for everybody. Let them eat where they eat naturally, like they do in their real life. Approximate that. And then go back and fill in the space that's left over with the classrooms that you need. And we committed to doing so without asking for additional dollars. So we delivered their 24 classrooms and everything that was in their program, plus a new cafeteria and a new library. And what we've heard, the impact is that there are no more fights during lunch. And we attribute this to reduced stress and anxiety. When people come to lunch, they're not stressed anymore. And students taking care of their built environment because they want it to perdure, because they value it. And that just goes to show how design can really impact equity and access to education and to opportunity, right? Because we took that segregated community and brought it together. Socioeconomically, it's a very diverse population. Racially, it's a very diverse population. And you go in there today and they are acting as a community of one, like they thought they were. That's an easy example of how you can really do it through design.
Thanks for that story, and thanks for allowing us to squeeze in an extra 8 minutes. And Deb, thanks for being a part of this. There's so much more that any of you could offer, but our time was short. I do want to put a note in everyone's calendar that our next event will be a national summit on school design on March 31st. If you were registered for today's event, you will be invited to that as well. We look forward to reconvening with CityAge and Siegel Family Endowment at that time. And now we turn the conclusion of this back over to Zara.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody who was part of this discussion. And now let's take a look at the poll results from that last question. As it pops up on your screen, you can see that it was fairly evenly divided amongst the answers. And that does wrap up our program today. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you enjoyed hearing from the visionary leaders we had with us today. They are working to make the Bay Area's neighborhoods complete by centering them around education. We hope you leave today with lessons on how you can build more equitable, dynamic, and livable neighborhoods in your city. Thank you for joining the conversation. And thank you to our guests, attendees, and of course our partners, Reimagine America Schools and the Siegel Family Endowment. CityAge and Reimagine America Schools have been engaged in significant discussions about how the pandemic may change communities and schools, and presenting strategies to education and civic leaders to help implement those changes. We will be continuing to do that. As Ron mentioned, our partnership will be presenting the culmination of our work at a national summit on school design happening on March 31st. Please watch for more information on this important national discussion. And if you're interested in collaborating with CityAge or Reimagine America Schools, please do get in touch with us. Until next time, I'm Zara Alani. Thank you for joining us today.